Imagine boarding a flight after a long day, ready to relax, only to witness an interaction so shocking it leaves the entire cabin stunned. That's exactly what happened when a high-powered CEO, brimming with arrogance, dismissed a kind-hearted black doctor in the most disrespectful way imaginable. It all started with a simple request, but things quickly escalated when the CEO's rude assumptions clashed with the doctor's quiet dignity. Passengers couldn't believe what they were hearing until the doctor's next move completely flipped the script. What unfolded after this moment not only silenced the CEO, but taught everyone on board a lesson they'd never forget. Was it karma? A life-changing revelation? Stay tuned, because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought about respect, kindness, and how appearances can deceive. The flight had just taken off, and everything seemed ordinary at first. Passengers were settling in, chatting softly, or scrolling through their phones. The black doctor, dressed in casual clothes, was seated quietly, minding her own business. She had no idea her expertise and character were about to be tested in front of dozens of strangers. Meanwhile, the CEO, dressed sharply in a tailored suit and clearly accustomed to getting his way, began making condescending remarks when a small issue arose in the cabin. The passenger nearby was feeling unwell, and the flight attendants made an announcement asking if there was a doctor on board. Without hesitation, the black doctor stood up, offering her help. But before she could even introduce herself, the CEO scoffed loudly, dismissing her with a smug, "There's no way you're a doctor." The cabin fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. What would she do next? The doctor paused for a moment, her calm expression revealing nothing of the emotions swirling beneath the surface. The CEO's words hung heavy in the air, and passengers exchanged awkward glances, unsure of what to do. The flight attendants hesitated too, clearly caught off guard by the tension. But instead of backing down, the doctor stepped forward, her voice steady as she said, "I am a licensed physician. Let me help." The CEO let out a mocking laugh, shaking his head as he muttered something about imposters and standards. It was clear he didn't believe her and wasn't shy about showing it. A few passengers looked visibly uncomfortable, while others watched with curiosity, wondering how this would unfold. But then came the real twist. Another passenger spoke up. "I've seen her work before," the man said firmly. "She's an incredible doctor." This unexpected support only deepened the mystery. Who was this man, and how did he know her? And more importantly, how would the CEO react now? The cabin was buzzing now. Passengers whispered among themselves, some leaning forward to get a better view. The CEO, visibly irritated, crossed his arms and shot an incredulous look at the man who had spoken up. "Are you serious? This has to be a joke," he said dismissively, shaking his head as if the idea of her being a doctor was too absurd to entertain. The doctor, however, remained composed. Ignoring the CEO's comments, she turned to the flight attendants, who looked unsure of what to do. "Please let me assist the passenger. Time could be critical," she said with quiet authority. Her confidence seemed to shift the energy in the room, and after a brief hesitation, the flight attendants nodded and stepped aside. As she moved toward the sick passenger, the CEO leaned back in his seat, muttering loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Let's see how this plays out." His words dripped with doubt, but the doctor didn't even flinch. Meanwhile, the man who had spoken earlier followed her, clearly determined to support her. The tension reached a boiling point as everyone waited, holding their breath, wondering if the doctor would prove herself, or if the CEO's harsh judgment would somehow be validated. The cabin felt like a powder keg, and it was about to explode. The doctor knelt beside the sick passenger, quickly assessing the situation with a calm precision that silenced even the whispers around her. Her movements were confident, every action purposeful, and for a moment, the tension seemed to fade as she focused entirely on helping the person in need. But just as the passengers began to relax, the CEO leaned forward again, raising his voice. "Is anyone going to check her credentials? What if she makes things worse? He barked, his tone growing sharper. His words sent a ripple through the cabin, and some passengers shifted uncomfortably, torn between the doctor's obvious composure and the CEO's persistent doubts. Before anyone could respond, the man who had vouched for her stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "You really don't know who she is, do you?" he said, his eyes locking on the CEO. "She's not just any doctor. She's one of the top specialists in her field. She's saved countless lives." The CEO froze, caught off guard by the bold statement. But before he could respond, the sick passenger's condition suddenly worsened, drawing everyone's attention back to the doctor. She calmly called for specific medical supplies from the flight crew, her tone so authoritative that even the CEO fell silent. The tension soared as the passengers watched her work, the stakes growing higher with every second. But just when it seemed the situation couldn't escalate further, the man revealed something that left the cabin in stunned silence. "She's not just a doctor, she's the head of the very hospital I fund," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a shockwave. The cabin went completely still as the man's words sank in. The CEO's smug expression faltered, replaced by visible shock. He glanced at the doctor, then back at the man, clearly struggling to process what he'd just heard. Meanwhile, the doctor, unfazed by the revelation, stayed focused on her patient. With calm precision, she stabilized the passenger, her expertise evident in every move. The tension eased as the sick passenger's breathing became steady, and a wave of relief swept through the cabin. Applause erupted, breaking the silence, but the doctor only gave a small nod, returning to her seat without a word. But the story didn't end there. As the CEO awkwardly avoided eye contact, the man who defended her walked over and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "You judged her without knowing her, yet she still chose to act with grace and save a life. That's what true professionalism looks like." The CEO, visibly humbled, stood and turned to the doctor. His voice was quiet now, stripped of arrogance. "I was wrong." "I'm sorry," he said. The doctor looked at him, her calm demeanor unchanged, and simply replied, "It's never about proving a point. It's about doing the right thing." As the flight continued, passengers buzzed about what they'd just witnessed, but the CEO remained silent, clearly reflecting on the lesson he'd learned. And as for the doctor, she simply returned to her book, embodying the quiet strength that had left everyone speechless. As the flight neared its destination, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Passengers who once watched in silence now exchanged smiles and kind words, inspired by what they'd witnessed. The CEO remained in his seat, uncharacteristically quiet, his earlier arrogance replaced with reflection. He glanced at the doctor a few times, as if trying to find the right words, but she never sought acknowledgement. Her actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. When the plane landed, many passengers stopped to thank the doctor personally. Some even shared how her calm strength had inspired them. The man who had defended her shook her hand, saying, "The world needs more people like you." She simply smiled and replied, "We all have a part to play." As she walked through the airport, blending into the crowd, the lesson lingered. Respect is earned not by status or assumptions, but by character and actions.